Do I need to? Every day we just obviously, yeah, all the dogs are just like near life. I went to
Yeah, ready? Okay. Okay. Good evening and welcome, everybody. It's so good to see all of you here. It's fantastic. Okay. No, also because this event was sold out in like 48 hours. So for whoever could actually make it is quite a privilege, I think, for tonight. So
I
thank
paid
you.
them all. They're not really here for everything.
So just so you know that this event will be recorded and we are live streaming for tonight because of the high demand of people that wanted to attend the event. Welcome to the CCA. I don't know how familiar you are with the institution. My name is Viviana Checchia and I'm Public Engagement Curator here. I started around 3 years ago. And I immediately decided that it was important for the institution to try to devote a program to the definition of social engager practice. We so far delivered a symposium called Social Intentions, and then an exhibition called Forms of Action, and also a long-term program, of which this event is part of, called Intentions in Action. For the Intentions in Action program, what I tried to do was to put together a series of talks, workshops, brainstormings, presentations, different sort of events, including screenings, that would represent the different approaches that are present all over the globe, and that can be defined as social engaged art practice. Now, the definition itself of social engaged art practice is still blurry, and it's quite difficult, it's very controversial, and so far, all the people that participated in the program were international speakers or art practitioners, sociologists, directors, and this is the first time that we are actually inviting someone local. I mean, you are not Scottish, but you operate here, so yeah. And it's also part of the intention of the trajectory of the overall program. So we started from looking outside and trying to understand what is that we can learn and how some of those methodologies that have been already applied in Indonesia or in the US or in Spain can potentially be transferable here in Scotland, how we can adapt that. If it is actually a good idea to use some of those tools or to actually ignore them and create new ones that are specifically addressing issues that are more connected with this context rather than any other context. This program is coming to an end as well. August is going to be the last month. It kind of lasted exactly for 1 year. But since we had an high demand of different sorts of events, part of the Intentions in Action, and lots of artists wanted one-to-one conversations about the different topics that we explored, we decided that the program is going to convert in something else. So if you are interested in the content of it, stay tuned and wait for whatever this is going to become. I can't reveal it now. Okay, but for tonight specifically, one of the words that we are trying to reinterpret and examine through the work of Anthony Schrag, which is the guest for tonight, is participation. I will use some of his words. So examining the function of and ethics containing working with people, this talk by Anthony Schrag frames a theoretical basis for cultural projects happening outside of traditional art spaces and explores the dynamics that emerge when working with communities. This is really, for me, is really important because I'm very aware that we have different point of views. We use participation in a different way, and I love to live zone constantly. So I wanted to open up this discussion and understanding what Anthony can propose to us and may create some sort of critical point of view that can also come from you. So feel free to actually be part of the conversation and ask questions. You will be recorded by those mics, so there will not be like any sort of microphone going around the room. Also some information about Anthony Schrag. Anthony Schrag is currently a lecturer of cultural management at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh. He's a practitioner and researcher with an interest in the ethical complications that arise when working with people. So this talk begins by framing an historical and theoretical basis for cultural projects happening outside of traditional art spaces and explores the relations of power and problematics that emerge when working within and with communities. So please help me to welcome Anthony Schrag.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Viviana. That's very good to be here. It's very wonderful to see lots of people who I have known in very different contexts. will hopefully be doing what Viviana suggested I would do, but I'm also kind of framing it a lot to do with I guess, my own trajectory and where I came to a lot of the understandings that I have. And I sort of say that and frame that with the, as a sort of way to say that this is all just one guy's opinion. Yes, I have a PhD, but it's just my own opinion, so don't take anything as rote. But I think what I really do like is what Viviana suggested, that there's different terms. We use the same words that mean different things, and we mean different things, and I'm kind of interested in what we, how we can unpick those, not to fix them and say this is what this practice is, but just so that we can understand them better. So I'm going to show some slides of things that I've done. I am, as you can probably guess, quite a big fan of participation, so if you're bored, throw something at me, or if you want to talk about stuff, just throw your hand up, or just have a chat. Cool. So I call the talk, The Artist is the Social Worker versus Artist is the Social Wanker, because I am, as I said, kind of interested in the definitions of those terms and what we mean by those things, and especially because there are a lot of assumptions around this kind of work, so I kind of wanted to unravel it. I am going to start with a video that I didn't realize, well, I kind of knew it, but I'd forgotten that this was a work that I made right here when I was working at this as a duty manager as part of the CCA when I was doing my MFA. And it's a work that frames a lot of my thinking. And it was a work that I didn't realize I was making until I actually made it. And it's actually just outside underneath there. And so it's very weird to show it here because it's never really come back. But that's the kind of work that I suppose I used to do, and that's me with my shirt hanging up and my blood rushing to my head. And what I'm doing is I'm hooking my feet underneath the stairs, so my whole weight is kind of rested there to make it look as though, hey, aren't I great? I'm dangling from my toes. Which, it's pretty cool. But I don't show it to say, hey, I'm great, I can dangle from my toes. I show this video because of this clip. And this clip was my practice run. And this was me preparing to make sure I didn't smash my head open, which is very real and possible. But as I was working in this very busy building, I forgot to lock the doors in this area. And so someone from the cultural office came downstairs while I was practicing this. And I think in seeing that again, I realized that a lot of what my interest is in with art is a gentleman sort of starting with an idea, but then allowing another person to change that. And so that's kind of where I started a lot of my trajectory of understanding what participation is, or what working with other people means. It was this understanding that it was a conversation, that you start something, but someone else can change it, and they can change it for the better or for worse. But that possibility that someone can change something is, I suppose, is what's really exciting. I do have a PhD in this subject. This is what apparently it's called. If anyone can tell me what that means, that would be really helpful. But generally, I suppose my interest lies in institutions, the relationship between institutions, communities, and the artists that are employed to work with those. So it's that kind of relationship between those three things and how they do it. And I'm interested in conflict and the conflict between those things and how conflict can be productive. My history is perhaps slightly got a difficult relationship with conflict. This is a picture of me when I'm 7 firing a semi-automatic machine gun as I grew up with my dad in Africa. So my relationship with conflict has always been, I've always kind of gone towards it rather than run away from it. And I think that's possibly why I enjoy having a discourse and discussion. But it also sets me up as something that has possibly had something slightly different relationship with it as I grew up. I trained as a photographer in Canada, but I was a pretty crap photographer. I used to cut my head off a lot. I used to sort of get these prints and show them to my professors, and they'd go, well, that's very nice, but it's a bit cyan. And I would go, well, get the point though, right? It kind of made me realize that I wasn't very interested in visual things. I was far more interested in physical things. And it kind of came to an understanding when my tutor at the time, Liz Megger, said to me, Anthony, art is the thing that challenges our perceptual habits. And this is a definition I constantly go back to, and it's a definition that I define as art, because I think it's a phrase that succinctly defines the purpose and the function of art. It isn't about self-expression, and it's about the fact that whatever is perceptually challenging to me might not be perceptually challenging to you. And so the context of where the art lies and where the shifts in thinking lies is always contextual. And so I kind of always refer back to that notion. And so when I heard this, I kind of went out into the world to explore things that perceptually challenged. So I started by making things that would destroy themselves, like this. But very quickly, I kind of understood that they didn't really do anything to me. They weren't really challenging what I was trying to do, because they kind of still existed as objects, as art. So I went out into the world to try and kind of unravel what it is that I was interested in, and kind of climbed on things and started challenging the perceptual habits of me in the world. Here's me in China with some lovely confused Chinese ladies. Here's me in Glasgow with some lovely confused Glaswegians, and so on. And I suppose a lot of these works were very much based around exploring where I was in the world and what I meant. It's not his art that hangs on walls, it's him. Hilarious. But I suppose what came from that was an understanding of my ontologies of how I perceived the world, and how I kind of how I chose to understand the world was through a physical interaction rather than a visual interaction. So that kind of set me up to understand how I could do art physically. And so I kind of went off into the world to do things that would challenge people's perceptual habits physically. And a lot of this initially was based within kind of gallery context, because that's where art was, right? That's what I assumed art was. And so this was a whole series of works where the gallery became aggressive, and the gallery forced people to be physical and have a physical understanding of the world. Sometimes it worked, and other times people were not impressed at all. And other times I think it worked really, really well, if a little bit mean. But the understanding of I suppose, that it could be a participatory experience, in the sense that things could happen together with people, and that actually I could begin a gesture and someone could do something back, kind of stayed quite strongly with me. And I was continuing to work in these zones of participation, but it was very much framed within the gallery. And so this was a project called Rules and Regulations, which was the idea that you went on a residency and you were given by the curator 3 rules for your practice, and over the course of the month you had to challenge your practice by following these 3 rules. And it was in Bracknell, which I discovered meant bracken-covered secret place. And I realized that the town itself had quite a lot. Pick up the bins, they really hated some notions idea, and that typical kind of understanding of local council, bad people, good. And so as I kind of realized that Bracknell meant bracken-covered secret place, I constructed a bracken-covered secret place within the gallery, and I persuaded the mayor of the town to sit in this place. And so when people kind of crawled into this little thing, they were suddenly kind of enclosed in this tiny little space with the mayor of town. And a lot of people thought he was an actor because they hadn't really seen the mayor. And so they would go, all right, yeah, sure, you're the mayor. Listen, I got a few things to tell you. And it was the first time that not only they could, without that sort of mediated space of the formal government spaces, they could tell them what they thought, but also it was the time where the mayor really heard exactly what people felt. And so I think in some ways that was a beginning of my relationship with understanding that art isn't just participatory and it's physical, but there's some sort of political elements to it and an understanding of it. But they were all mediated in the gallery, and this was the thing that really bugged me. And so I started to do things like this, which was just a giant sign that was 7.5 meters long, and I strapped it to my back, and I went for a walk down Sucky Hall Street and got trapped between signs, and people yelled at me and all that sort of thing. One piece of advice though, right? If you ever do decide to strap on a sign that's 7.5 meters long and go for a walk down Sucky Hall Street on a Saturday afternoon after an Old Firm match, and you happen to walk past a few pubs and a few men come running out and spin you around and around and around, just go with it, because there's nothing you can do about that. But I suppose what I liked about it was that it wasn't just making work with them. That kind of interface and that inter-exchange was that it was something interpersonal. It was relational. We were actually having, we were meeting as equal agents. I wasn't the one that was framing it in the gallery space. We were kind of meeting as equals because of the space and the space that it was. So it took it out of that mediated gallery space and into the sort of zone. And I think the definition of art that I really love comes from Anne-Marie Copstake, of this kind of work. Because she was once asked, what do you do? And she went, I work with people who are not me. I was like, yeah, that's what I do. But there's something about the idea that this experience with other people that you have, this interrelational experience, is the only way that we truly learn about ourselves. And so while I am interested in other people, I think there's a selfish thing on my side, and I kind of accept that because I'm interested to learn about my own edges, and I hope that when I interface with someone, that's what they want to do. And it's not about me having an idea of what I can do to someone, but it's very much about going, hey, we're two people or many people in a space, what does that mean? And how can we do something interesting with that? So a lot of my projects were really based about this. This is a project called I did in Devon Arts, which is up in the north of Scotland, which is a very interesting context. And the context of the town was that many men in that village work on offshore oil rigs and away from home. And so I was invited to go and do a project that kind of challenged this notion. And so it started with me kind of just showing up in the village and talking to people whose father figure, be they an actual father figure or a stepfather or whoever, was away from home. And I would say, hi, can I just come and have a dinner with you? Can I just have a dinner and talk about what that meant? And so these are different families that I had dinners with and talk about stuff. And slowly I kind of came to realize that a lot of the men really wanted to talk, the kids wanted to talk about a role model figure, but they didn't really have a forum for that. So I was like, how can I discuss the notion of a role model in a way that is interesting and fun and not really boring? And so I kind of hung out outside the schools with this giant sign. It's also a piece of advice. Don't really do that very often. Intentionally playing on the word role as in role model and roll as in hill rolling, because basically this was a forum where I just invited kids to come over up a hill and roll down the hill. And it was just a very stupid, silly gesture, but the point was that it was a way to start them talking about it. It was a way to kind of have that conversation, and it was a way to go, well, what does this mean? Yeah, okay, we're being a bit silly, but actually there are forums by which we can talk about a subject that's very difficult and very complicated. Some very good rolling here. This is some very, very good rolling. I do have another piece of advice. If you wrap a 10-year-old boy in a blanket and push him down a hill, and he's wrapped in the blanket so he can't move his hands, he can't stop. So Aiden was green by the time I got to the end of that hill, poor guy. Anyway, but the whole project kind of took place over lots of different. It was an understanding about process, because it wasn't just this one event here or having dinner with people. I also had a project called Rent-A-Dad, where it was an ad in the paper where people could literally call me up and go, can you come and do this dad thing? He promised he would clean out the garage before he went away on the oil rig, so can you come and do that? Or this lady said, I'm a single mum. I want my son to ride a bike, but I don't know how to ride a bike. Can you come over every Thursday and teach him how to ride a bike? And that was it. That was the exchange. But it was so all the processes that occurred, or growing a beard to teach the 16-year-old boys who didn't have a dad to teach them how to shave, to learn how to shave using me. Another piece of advice, giving 16-year-old boys razors, maybe not a smart idea. It seemed to work. But all the different processes that happened were really about lots of different events that were a process by which we could talk about a subject that was really quite big. It kind of culminated in this event called the Perfect Father's Day, which at the time I didn't really know what it was, but it ended with a tug of war between all the dads in the village, all the male role models that still remained in the village, and everyone else. And it was a tension of going, well, who is... At the time, I think I was referring to it as strength, and I kind of didn't... I thought there was a metaphor of who is stronger, these few people or that. I'll come back to it, but I think it's important to kind of reference that as an artist, you often don't know what you're doing. You're just doing stuff. And a lot of this stuff was me going, oh, I'll go roll down a hill with some kids, okay. Oh, I'm going to go rent a dad. Yeah, tug of war, yeah, that sounds great. And I can make sense of it in retrospect. But at the time, a lot of it doesn't make sense. I knew that I was interested in talking to people in interesting ways. But the problem is that those interesting ways of social engagement or participation, they often are expected to do certain things. I was expected to make people feel better about the lack of fatherhood. This was a project in Denniston where I was expected to discuss the violence in Denniston. And so I thought, you know what, I can't do that. I'm just a guy. So I created a forum by which to talk about it, but perhaps in an interesting context. So the notion of the human piñata is that we could be violent, but we could do it in a way that maybe isn't didactic, but it's about having a conversation in a way that is maybe visible, maybe visual, maybe physical, maybe innate, maybe you don't even recognize it, but it's a way to kind of just try that. And now I'm not wearing a helmet, and that's very key because I need to be as uncomfortable as people I'm working with. And so while it's uncomfortable for someone who's never involved in these crazy things to take part, I should also be at risk in some ways. Except when the kid goes for your head, which he does. But he changes his mind because people are good. Anyway. So the notion of art and social work, I think, is really interesting because the assumption that art is going to help someone, I find very, very, very problematic. And even if we just kind of really simplify this topic and say, okay, well, let's define what they do. You know, in some ways, yes, both a social worker and an artist have formal training. Okay, you're one in certain kind of context, one in another. Yes, in some ways, they're both concerned with the world and what they can do in the world. But I think this is where the kind of similarities start breaking down. You know, a social work agency is responsible to certain formal governing bodies, whereas an artist is not. A social work body has institutional frameworks in which they work. An artist does not. There are many different frameworks. Artists and art generally operates in the silo of art, and whereas social work happens across institutions. It goes through the police, through the NHS, through many different kinds of subjects. And I also think that social work policy is governed by democratic remits, whereas in Scotland at present we have no cultural policy. They're working on it, but we don't have a remit of what art should do. So I'm very, very, very concerned about collapsing social work and socially engaged artwork because of its intentions. Yeah, of course, obviously, there's a correct way of being a social worker, but there's no correct way of being an artist. So I think it's possible that if we frame art to help people, then there's an ethical issue happening, and I'm very uncomfortable with that. And I think this project really kind of highlighted it. We're doing okay. Doing all right. We're going to fly through a bunch of projects here. Hold on. So this is a project I did called the Legacy of City Art Projects. It was a commission to work on notions of sectarianism in Glasgow. And I was commissioned to technically go out into 3 areas of Glasgow, Denniston, Torrey and Easterhouse. And I was to work with these kids, and I was to make art with them. And that art was then going to go back to the Gallery of Modern Art in a series of exhibitions. And as part of the social inclusion remits of New Labour, their lives would be better, because that's how art works. It's really simple. Boom, 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 done, we fixed. Obviously, it's not like that. And for me, it kind of came to a sort of emotional head when I met this kid, and this is his dad. He's just been in a fight. There's still blood on the golf club. And you're going, sorry, art's supposed to do what? That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, not only am I being employed to work with unemployed people, there are certain ethical elements happening here. Now, I don't think that means you don't do art. I think that means is where you place the art. Because what I felt was that there was an issue with the people who'd commissioned me, these guys, the Gallery of Modern Art, and their assumptions. And so it was about flipping that relationship and going and saying, okay, well, I want you guys who commission me, who's the city council, the several advisory boards, and the curators, I want you to come for a meeting in the Gallery of Modern Art. I want to talk about this issue. So they came, but when they got the big round oak table and the big red velvet chairs was missing, and they said, oh, I thought we were having a meeting here. And I said, yeah, we are. Just come downstairs, come downstairs. And I threw them in the back of a van, and I kidnapped them, and I took them out to Torrey Glen, and I say, we are going to have that meeting, but we're going to have it here. And we're going to talk about what it is to be in here and what you think art can do in this context. Not everyone was very happy with that. But I think when we talk about notions of making a difference and where power lies, because for me, art is about power. So if we understand that art can be critical about things, we have to be aware of what we're being critical about. So for me, this was an intervention into those people who had the power versus those people who had a different kind of power but no access to resources. So it was about kind of shifting those things. And for me, it's always a question, all this work, all work that's in the social realm is about who is it for? That is the biggest thing. In some ways, that is the question that we always have to wrestle with. I'm not saying that it has to be one thing. I'm definitely not saying that. But what I am saying is being very clear. And that's the same with all art. It's the same with all things. You have to be clear of who that audience is. Because I think as a field, we really need to address it. There's a lot of text here. You don't need to read it. You do, but it's mostly about the problem kind of really emerged when New Labour kind of came to power, and they started sort of using the social inclusion term and started funding projects based on the notion of social inclusion. Now that's a lovely idea, but the question, it didn't really analyze who they are being included into and why they're being taken into that notion. There's also an understanding that there's a financial imperative to fund people who are working with people, because that's a democratic remit and use of social and use of public money in a ways that an artist sitting in a studio by themselves is not. But the problem is if you do that, all the work then becomes an extension of a state-run art funding. You have to make art in a certain kind of way. So it creates a whole series of problems that artists making in that field kind of have to address. But to me, this has a lot to do with also our, as an artistic field, I'm jumping ahead, our relationship as an artistic field of where our history and our legacies come from and what our languages are about. Because if someone whose legacy comes from the futurists in the 1920s through John Cage and notions of 423, where he just sat there in silent and made other people kind of make the work, or the artist placement group of Jeremy Deller, that kind of conflictual lineage is very, very, very different than someone who kind of comes from public art to the Situationists, to the community arts movement, through to Superflex, who are artists we can talk about later. But what I'm saying is that if we are, as artists, emerging from certain lineages, we have different languages, and we really need to address that. Me, because this is all about me for the next 20 or so minutes, I frame it along these 6 terms. And Vivian, Anne, and I will have a chat about this. I frame it along these 6 terms. I think there are 6 types of participatory artworks. I think they are relational, dialogical, activist, engaged, community arts, public art. I don't say that to limit it. I just kind of the general fields that they live in. And each one of those fields generally defers to a kind of topic. So one kind of is more institutional. It's public art, for example. The city council is going to fund a public artwork that's going to sit in a community, and it's about the institutions of power maintaining that. Political art, that's activist art. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to change the world. And then the socially art, community art, it's more like, here's do a mural about lovely things with the community. So they kind of already, even if we start to do that, they start to do very different things. And there's a background to all of that, which I find really, really difficult as well. And that's, is this education or is it participation? And they are 2 very different things. Education is, to be very, 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 very simplistic, you don't know something, I'm going to teach you something. Participation is, what can we find out together? So they do very, 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 very different things. And I think it's really important we know this, because we have to know what art actually is going to do. If we think art's going to save the world, that's something we need to address. I do love this phrase. If anyone who can't read it, it says, art won't work. Art won't save the world. Go volunteer at a soup kitchen, you pretentious fuck. So, for me, it's a question about what can art actually do. And I think to illustrate this project, I want to talk about this, which is a project I did in Pakistan where I was commissioned to make a piece of public art. And recent graduate, I'm like, oh yeah, fuck, awesome. I can go make a piece of public art in Pakistan, awesome. Get in a plane, get there, and hang on, I'm white from the Western world. What am I doing here making a piece of public art? So what I tried to do, and I was working with an art school in Lahore, and what I tried to do is I said, do you know what, let's remove the artists from this equation. Let's not say that it's artists who are doing that. Let's create a situation where actually I want to build something with people and I want them to build it. So this project was called the Ship of Hope. And the idea was that we just delivered materials to a park and we made the gesture. We said, we'd like to make a ship of hope. There's no overarching design. It's built by whoever's there. We've got 3 days to build it, and on the 3rd day, we're going to take it to the canal. And if it sinks, then hope is dead. And if it floats, then hope lives. Over to you. And so over the course of 3 days, lots of people came, built by housewives, bankers, students, and there were all these artists who were part of the project, and they were like, oh, I've got an idea. We can totally do this. I'm going to go and make this thing. And I kept saying, no, 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 no. It's not about the artist making a thing for people. Artists, you just have to step off. I have to step off. My only role right now is to deliver the materials for us to make together. That's my only role. And so there were 5 homeless kids that lived in the park, and it became their project. And it became the project where they kind of communicated what it was about, and it became they were the ones that wanted to build it. They slept under it, and on the 5th day, the 3rd day, we took it all down to the canal, and about 500 people showed up to wish us off. And good news, hope lives. Barely, but it lives. And all these artists were still there, and they kept going, oh, that's fantastic, we can still do this. Can I get on? Can I do this? And I kept saying, artists, no. Step aside. We had a really lovely time. Another piece of advice, if you do happen to fall into a central canal in Lahore, and there's bits of meat floating by you, just ignore them. So at the end of the day, all these artists were still hanging around, and they said, we still want to get involved. And I said, okay, fine. Can you help me take this thing out of the water? And they were so rough with it, because you have to remember, it didn't look like art. It looked like that. And they were so rough with it when they pulled it out that they kind of ripped it apart in front of everyone who'd built it, because they thought it was quite funny. And I think in some ways, when we make art and we assume that art is going to make change, we have to accept that change can also mean to make things worse. That's also a change, and we can also do that. But there's a question of, if we want to make a change, there's an assumption of better, and there's an assumption of who gets to decide what's better, and what are the ethics of responsibility when we choose to work in the public realm. And so, for me, a lot of these questions of helping is really a kind of hangovers of a lot of colonial ideas of kind of going into places and helping, which of course have, really positive effects. I really quite, replace empire with gallery or museum education, and you've kind of got the same thing. You've kind of got this idea that actually this is almost a colonial experience. We're going out and we're forcing people to like art because art's great. So it's really quite problematic. And this notion of expanding the frame is also problematic because in some ways a lot of socially engaged participatory practices intentionally exist outside of art. But the more we are then incorporated by art and the frame of art expands, then it's incorporated into it. And the things that was not art becomes part of art. And this frame just keeps expanding, 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 and it becomes neutralized because it's just art. And so while I'm also concerned about the instrumentalization of socially engaged artworks, participatory practices, I'm also very concerned about how it becomes neutralized if it's just art, and how art then maintains any kind of power in the real world, and what that means. Some of the most sort of effective works in socially engaged canon are things that I actually think are really quite problematic. So this is Suzanne Lacey's work, The Roof is on Fire, part of her Oakland projects, where she developed a whole series of works with black youth and police officers. In this one, the black youth were in open-top convertible cars, and they were placed with police officers to talk about their issues and their problems. Problematically, I find in the documentation of this, these who the audiences are. It's a whole bunch of white people that have come to look at black kids in cars. And I think that notion of all of the documentation of that project, I wasn't there, I've read some of it, I can't be an expert of it, but I find it very problematic because actually what it's doing is these people are just materials. They're materials to make the artwork. I know she had an impact. Suzanne Lacey is dedicated to changing the world, but the problem is where she frames it and where it goes back to, I find is problematic. The same I think is true in the Immigrant Movement International, Tanya Bruguera, which was a project where she got, I'm going to say $80,000, I think that sounds about right, by the Creative Time to develop this project called the Immigrant Movement International, which was a community center, come legal advice center, come community center, to talk about immigration in Queens, in New York. The thing I find really problematic about this work was that it was based within an immigrant community. And so the people who were there and the people who were using it we're already part of that project. Like, imagine how powerful this would be if it was based in the lobby of a multinational corporation that employs immigrants, or in a neighborhood in right-wing America who employs illegal immigrants to mow their lawns. Like, where it sits is where its power lies. And that's where art kind of goes back. And I kind of refer back to my legacy project about kidnapping those city councillors, is that oftentimes we're kind of preaching to the converted, especially in the art world. We're all sitting here, all these projects that have recently come back are sort of touted as very powerful works, and they are, but they sit in the art world. And we all know this. We all know immigrants have a terrible time. We all know refugees are really, really having a hideous problem. So why are we doing these things where we all going to go, oh yes, you're right, those are terrible things. Right, so we're going to the opening. There's a question, I suppose, about when we place this stuff. And a lot of these works have truly emphatic and powerful and exciting ideas, like the rebel clandestine clown army, who have actually exhibited here, I remember. But the work that they make is really about sort of trying to critique neoliberal policies. So they have a political bent, and they're trying to create the world in their specific way. Chantal Mouffe is a theorist of mine not mine, just my theorist, no one else's theorist. That used to be a microphone, but I photoshopped an ice cream into it because I thought it was nicer. But the idea that there is a kind of art that is critical or that is subversive is very problematic, because there is no subversive that can't be recapitulated by the dominant hegemony. And what I mean by that is that there's no crazy outsider art that we can go be critical of that the dominant world won't take as marketing, won't take as new cultural policy, won't take as anything else that serves their purposes. So we have to be really careful when we talk about notions of leftist wings and politicals. This is the assume. But, really sadly, capitalists have rights too. The right wing have rights too. Or a conversation I once had with my friend is patriarchs also have feelings. The notion that we can stand at a certain political point and critique another politics as wrong is very problematic. And to me, this is about the difference between politics and political. When we talk about politics, we talk about the left and right, Tory, Green, those kinds of party politics. But when we talk about the political, that's the way that the world is organized. There's a political element in this room. I'm standing, you're sitting. That's political. But we don't have to necessarily frame ourselves on those traditional politics. So for me, a lot of art is about, I'm going to skip this bit because it's boring. For me, a lot of it is about creating the difference between consensus and dissensus. And what I mean by that is activism of political art isn't dissensus. They're trying to create a leftist consensus. You're trying to create a world in your image where everyone believes in what you believe. And whether or not I am a believer in that world, it doesn't matter. But I don't think that's the purpose of art. The purpose of art is to be political. It's to unravel the world around us, including art. So I'm going to show 3 projects really quickly. And this was that, which I hope, illustrate this point. So this is a project where I was asked to go to an area in Hackney, in Hoxton Square, where there are 5 ethnic groups that work and live in this one area. And I was sort of, while it wasn't written in the contract, in all the emails and all the discussions, the assumption was, and it was said quite often, you're going to make something that makes them all get along. And I kind of went, why? We live in a world where we don't have to. That's wonderful. So I created a 5-a-side tug of war. And the point about a 5-a-side tug of war, a normal tug of war, is that you can win. Someone gets pulled over to the line and someone loses. But with this, in a 5-a-side tug of war, you can't win, but you can't lose. You can't win, but you can lose. You can be the first out of 5 to be dragged into that center. So it becomes about the alliances that you form and you break in order to not lose. So it's not about winning, it's about not losing. And that changes the tensions, because I think in some ways those tensions become productive. You can have these points where there are active discussions that are happening, but that's what the world is. The world is things that are mussed up and confusing and conflicting. It's not about making everyone flat and consensus. Another project that hopefully I think does this was a project in the South London Gallery in Peckham where there were sort of emerging gang cultures. And the idea of the project was to kind of find a way to bring, to address these emerging postcode gang cultures. And so what I did is I developed an inter-estate football match. But it was literally inter-estate. There was one goal on one housing estate, and there was another goal on the other housing estate. And it was a 75-a-side match with 3 balls in play at the same time. It didn't collapse the gangs. They're still gangs, but it gave them a forum by which to discuss territory. It didn't shut down that discussion. It actually opened up that discussion and said, well, actually, I can go into that territory. It is dangerous to win, but I'm going to do it in a place that actually allows that conversation to happen productively. I don't think it stopped anything, but it allowed a moment to explore on how the world is organized. And to me, I think that's what it is. It's a framework that I tried to call the benefits of being a bit of an asshole. Because I think in the definition of an asshole, there's an irritating or contemptible person. And actually the notion of contempt is very interesting, because the notion you can be in contempt of court. It's being disrespectful to an authority. And that's where I go back to the social wanker notion, is that actually it's not about challenging a certain political system, but it's looking at the overall authority and unraveling that. And to me, I think that's where I'm going. I'm going to go to a couple examples which I think are really interesting, and then I'll wrap up. Is that okay? Okay. Is everyone okay? We're hot. It's warm. We're good though, right? Does anyone need water? Is anyone fainting? No? Okay. So this is a project by Artur Majewski. It's called Them. 2006, he got 4 social groups into one warehouse space, and there was a older Catholic group, a younger right-wing nationalist group, a LGBT socialist group, and a young Jewish group. And they were each given a canvas, and they had to paint an image that represented them. So the Catholic Church group built a church. And it started off quite, and then the nationalist group drew a sword, and someone else did a rainbow flag, and so they all had images that were very powerful and very strong. And each image was then taken, with everyone in the group, was taken and then handed over to another group. And the other group could do whatever they wanted to that image. And it started quite easily. The Jewish group received the Catholic Church group, and what they did is they cut the door open, because they just said, we feel excluded and we want to enter in. And the Catholic Church went, oh, that sounds great. Well, that's a lovely idea. But as they moved on, for example, the nationalist group had the big sort of right-wing sword slogan, and the LGBT group put a rainbow flag on it, which they didn't like. And then as these images get passed on and get passed on and get passed on, they get more and more aggressive and more violent to each other, because their central ideas are challenged. And it ended, although problematically edited, and I accept that, it ended with one of them setting them on fire and all of them rushing away, and then basically saying, the notion of pluralistic democracy doesn't work. Because fundamentally, we all have different ideological systems and they do not match up. So we're fucked. But it really started to unravel, these assumptions that we are going to fix things through art, or that isn't going to work that way. It's not that simplistic. I find this really problematic. It makes me cringe, but I think it's an amazing bit of work. This is Dora Garcia, called The Romeos at the Frieze Art Fair in 2008, where she hired attractive men to walk around the fringe as Frieze and flirt with women and eventually give them a fake number and then leave. And the women were none the wiser. And it's horrific, but the whole point of the work was the eternal promise as a woman in the art world that you're going to get somewhere. And you never do, because it was all a lie. It's a really horrific work, but I think it's really fascinating, because it does start to unravel those notions that are about the powers of the art world. This one also makes me cringe. This is Women on the Waves. This is a functioning abortion clinic that was run by artist Rebecca Gompert, who's also a medical doctor. And she goes to places where they don't provide reproductive health services, and park in international waters. and then women are invited to get onto those boats and have an abortion if they need it and go back. Regardless of my stance on the necessity for women to have access to reproductive rights, I find this very problematic because as soon as this project actively does an abortion, to do an abortion, is that what it's called? As soon as an abortion has happened by them, they've made a stance about who is right and who is wrong. If it was an idea, if it just sat in international waters off the coast of Ireland and said, we could do this, let's have a talk about it, I think it would be a much more powerful thing. But the fact that they do get women and they do give those services, I think complicates it for me slightly. Because not only do they provide those services, but you're making women highly visible. There's no aftercare. And anyone who gets on a boat who knows that they're going to go to this boat is going to know, socially, is going to know what's happening. So it's slightly problematic. To contrast that, I think this is a really amazing project. This is haircuts by children, by the mammalian diving reflex. And what they do is they go into communities and they teach kids how to cut hair for a week, and then they have a big event on the weekend where they open up this hair salon, and you can go and get your hair cut by children. And the children have complete control about what your hairstyle is going to be. It's awesome, because this assumption that actually, I love this guy's face at the end, because you've got all these kids going, you need a blue mohawk. Here we go. I think it's fantastic. But again, you're kind of unraveling who has the power. Of course, Santiago Serra has do I even want to bring him in? Should I? Okay, so Santiago Serra, he does works that are about the ethic problematics of the world. So this is a project where he paid, these are heroin addicts, these are sex workers, and he paid them the equivalent amount of money for either an ounce of heroin or an hour of their time to stand and have a tattoo along their back. All of his works are about people who are on the edge and who would do anything for money. They're about the ethical things that happen. A lot of people find them horrible. I think they're horrible, but I also think they are incredibly important. We can talk about those a little bit more, but I wanted to end with this project, which is Please Love Austria by Christoph Schlingensief. And he did a project where he got 12 illegal immigrants. We don't know if they're illegal immigrants or actors. That has to be said. But he got 12 illegal immigrants and he put them into a shipping container in the middle of Vienna. And he had TV cameras on them all the time, and they were broadcast out on the internet. And they had things like how to dress Austrian, how to be Austrian, how to be a better Austrian person. And at the end of every day, you could vote out an illegal immigrant, and they would go back to the detention center. And so in the course of the 2 weeks, the winner of this project would then hopefully get Austrian citizenship if they could win. Now, thousands of people came to this project and said this is the worst thing that you could do to people. Kids said this is a brilliant piece of satire. People came and said this is actually the most amazing, this is exactly how we should treat immigrants. But Christoph Schlingensief basically sat on the top of that shipping container, invited people from the left and right spectrum, asking them to talk on this subject. More people discussed the notion of immigration and refugees in Austria because of this project than the real detention center that was less than 6 kilometers away and had been there for 20 years. So the notion that he's complicated something and he's unraveled something, I think, is really important. And that's, to me, the power of the art, where art lies. I'm going to do one really, really, really quick project. I'm going a little bit over time. But I'm going to end with this in the gallery, because the conversation that Viviana started up, we started it in response to my visiting the Formats of Action. But this was a project, again, in the Gallery of Modern Art, and it was called Atelier Public. And the notion was that in the gallery, it was empty when it started. And as you walked in, there was just access to materials. You, as the public entering, made the art. You, as the public, could make anything that you wanted as you walked into that space. And so it was kind of any public were making these things, and it was all very nice. It was very, very pretty. When I went in to visit, it was fantastic, and there was lots of really bright colors, really happy things. But I was asked to develop a kind of response to it. And I was looking at how it was framed, and it was all framed that creation was very positive. And I thought, but destruction is also creation. destroying things is also productive. So I created this, it's hard to read, but basically in the Atelier Public blurb, it said that destruction is any part of creative act, and that in the middle of the exhibition, anyone could come and destroy any artwork that the public had made. If you felt that you needed to protect it, you could come and defend your artwork, but fundamentally, that day, that time, things were going to be destroyed. Up to you. So I kind of, this is a lot of the work, and this really made me angry, and I want to just rip it apart. So that's kind of where it came from. And so I invited people to have a discussion about this, and they came and they talked about it. And then we began to rip things apart. And it was fucking amazing, because people just ripped all the hard work off that other people had done. And there were some people there who came intentionally to defend their work. This little girl defended her work the whole time. Lots of people came. But mostly, it was kind of a fantastic way to unravel everything. The reason I bring it up was because of what happened was I didn't expect it. And I think this goes back to making sure that the artist is on equal footing to the institution, to the people. Because half an hour before I showed up, it had been advertised. 3 random people who I had not met, who I did not know anything about them, they'd read about it, they decided to show up to protect every single piece of art that they could. They were going to protect all the art that people had made. And under my set of the criteria, that was allowed. So they came in and they did everything that they could to create a barrier. So they were literally back there blocking anyone destroying anything, creating a human chain to stop anyone destroying art and protecting it. And there was like, one of them would run and go, I'll go and save the moose head. And they'd get a folder and they'd put the moose head in and they'd run away. And then, I'll go save the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And then they did that. And they saved as much art as possible. And so this was not only challenging to my concept, but it was challenging to me. I had to let that go, because that was the notion of relationships. It goes back to that stairs. I can start with a suggestion, but someone has to be able to change that. And if that's the way they're going, you have to let that go. Interestingly, I thought what was really happening is that a lot of the niceness that I saw that was happening, all those pretty things, was because actually people were coming in and writing graffiti and writing really attention, and the institution, the Gallery of Modern Art, had to go and cover it up because they couldn't be sitting there presenting works that were fundamentally racist or anything like that. So they had actually, this destruction revealed all the hiding that they had done. And so in this process, kind of, I was challenged, they were challenged, the people were challenged about what the notions of what art was. And I think that that is where its power lies. Do you know, I think this idea of actually unraveling something is where art, I think, truly lies. So I'm going to end by this picture. God, that just kind of flopped, didn't it, just at the end? I should have built up to some big thing and go, ta-da! But no, the future. We're working this way. We will continue to work this way. What do we need to do? Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments or abuse? I'll take all 3.
I'd like to know how your walking to Venice fits into this. This, social engagement. Your definition of
it
working
does
with people, because I followed it, and well,
it does in the sense that it challenged me. The reason I don't talk about that work is that it was framed as a social experience, but it very, very quickly became an entirely solitary experience. And so as a thing that challenged the expected perceptual habits, I was an artist who was going to work with people, and suddenly I wasn't working with anyone and didn't for a very long time. And so that is the way it is that kind of punch in the middle of a lot of this project, because it's about me having to reflect on how I make art. And so, yeah, it's a very poignant question to bring up, but I think I don't talk about it because the challenge was about me, not about groups of people. It's also, but it also, it's also as artists, we don't know. Like we start something and then we fail. Like it just becomes something else. I don't know what to do with the walk. I honestly don't know what to do with it. It's probably the biggest thing that I'm known for, and it literally, like that fucking red stick, sits in the corner of my house, and I kind of look at it every now and then. Go, oh, fuck! I walked to Venice. Right, what do I do with that? Yeah. Is there anything else people want to ask?
Can I ask a question about
You started.
Okay, I'll come back.
it's just obviously the fact you're saying that you're doing these projects, you're kind of taking away your ability to influence it by taking such a step back. Aren't you in a way kind of giving up the hope that you can influence a local community? Like what you were talking about this park and these children who got involved in it, and maybe it was quite an integrative process for them to be part of the community when normally they're on the sideline of that. But aren't you then just removing yourself from the whole situation? Like I almost, it's funny hard.
What right do I have to affect a community that's not mine?
First, so my background is like I'm a physiotherapist, and
Yeah.
you do have a sense that you do have to influence communities that.
Yeah.
Because you do know a few things that they don't.
Yeah.
I don't mean that in kind of a Western projection like you said about your problems, but there are some universal values that do have what is what is the point of it if you're not going to install them in anything?
I'm not sure that there are universal values, but I see what you're saying. But I think in some ways I hope that I did, in the sense that I provided a context for those children to be involved in a project that they hadn't been involved. I hopefully, while not intentionally, gave them a context where they were front and center, they had the control. Now this is all temporary. I had to leave, so I couldn't stay there and change their lives in any way, shape or form. So by stepping back, often it is about putting the people who need to be at the center. But they should be the ones that do have the agency to change that. I think Claire Bishop writes a lot about this stuff, but I think the most important thing that she writes is that she said, never underestimate, she didn't say this, but this is what I'm going to paraphrase, never underestimate a community's ability to turn around and tell you to fuck off. You have to walk in knowing that can happen. And that means they have agency. They have agency to choose to take part or not. And oftentimes it's just about the artist stepping back, because if I do have a sense that I'm going to make a lovely world and everyone's going to be better, that's my idea of what better is. And that might not be what someone else is better is. We can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
After you described your experiences and working with communities and the dynamics between the institutions and the communities, and then tampering with those dynamics, what would you do next time an institution comes to you and says, would you go work with this rough neighborhood somewhere? What would you do?
I did one really recently. That happens all the time. And what I do is I kind of say, well, I'll start. And I'll go there. And I'll figure out what we can do together. But we have to go together. We are a we now. If an institution comes to me and says, hey, we're going to go to Blackburn, which is a project that recently happened, and I say we start as a we, you're interested, you have this. But if they fall out, if they don't become a we, I'm off. Because I leave, the institution stays, the artist is temporary. So, yeah, I've turned down work.
But what does it mean to become a we?
What does the what?
What does it mean to become we?
We are committed to, the institution and me are committed to working on this project. If that means we pool resources to work with them, or if that means I challenge them, or if that means the society takes them, or whatever the we is, we start off with this we. We are now one. But, because that's the only way you start. A lot of people have intentions, they're honest, and they need to, like the kidnapping the city councillors. I have to give them credit. That was 8 years ago, and they're still having a conversation about how best to do participatory artworks. So most people, even the institutions, that you start off with them with the assumption that they have agency, and that they may have a slightly flawed idea, in my mind, that it might be my mind that's wrong. So let's start off as a we, and let's see where it goes. But you have to frame that really well. A lot of what I'm discovering is it's about infrastructure. Do these institutions have infrastructures in order to support these things? And that stuff I've kind of learned through a lot of really hideous experiences arriving at a residency and discovering my residency is sleeping on a couch with an alcoholic lady who was lovely, but you just go, well, is this the residency? Okay. But you have to understand what the infrastructures are of that organization. And if they have an infrastructure that can support a real analysis and examination, then that's probably me binging. That's really embarrassing. Sorry. If they have that analysis to be able to do that, then that works. But sometimes they don't, and then I have to
That's
go.
about responsibility, though, isn't it?
Yep. My own as well as theirs.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. So, do you think that art is more about starting a conversation rather than putting your ideas onto it?
Absolutely.
So, but if it's also okay for people to have lots of different ideas, why bother starting a conversation?
I bother getting up in the morning.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Like, why would you want to create conflict?
Because we already have conflict.
Yeah.
Conflict
exactly.
doesn't.
Why would you create more?
Because we can't ever get rid of it. Because conflict is the foundation of our society. It's not love. Society is based on the fact that we are different. That's conflict. So I don't think it's creating more. I think it's revealing what's already there. So like everyone says, well, yeah. I don't know how to phrase that in any other way other than saying it's already there, and I'm not trying to get rid of it. I'm just trying to expose it. Yeah.
So it's in a way holding a mirror up.
I guess. Yeah. But it's kind of holding up a mirror while laughing. Haha.
Yeah. Exposing yourself at the same
Yeah.
time. You're holding a mirror up.
Yeah.
You can only really talk about bigger stuff.
Yeah.
You can't deny if you're given
Yeah.
a commission, you go to a place, there's all that
Yeah.
backdrop to it, but you can try as
Yeah.
well as you can to hold.
But I think you're right. It's about also holding a mirror up to yourself
Yes.
as well, and everyone has to be aware of where we're all standing. Yeah, I think that's right.
Is there, if it's a case of holding up the mirror, right, and exposing what's already there in terms of conflict, so you're kind of dealing with a reality as it is as an artist, do you personally feel like you undertake it with an element of hope that whatever the outcome is, the interaction, the project, whatever, that people will find a better thing or will have had a good experience or will learn? I mean, is that your personal ambition?
I think there is definitely a sense of optimism when I do those things. But I think it's not about will they find a better thing, but it's will we have a great conversation? It's will we. That might be an uncomfortable conversation, but can we leave the time that we shared going, yeah, okay, we kind of got to some things that were interesting. Yeah, I do. I am quite hopeful about those things.
So it's about learning too?
It's not what?
It's also about learning and evolving? Learning and evolving? Is there...
For me, yes,
Yeah.
always. But I wouldn't say it's about learning I wouldn't want to be a teacher of other people.
I was thinking about that, about your notion of education
Yeah.
and how education is done in so many ways, and this might also be not education in that sense,
Yeah.
but it's learning.
Yeah.
And
It's almost about like a critical pedagogy. It's almost as if you're kind of hoping that we learn together, but you're not saying I'm going to teach you something. So, but then again, that's we're all on this planet. We're all learning everything together. I can sit next to someone on the bus, not as an art project, and go, "Oh, that's interesting," and have that chat, and we've learned something together, and that's great. And that's kind of how I see participation. But that's very different than saying, I'm going to go into a community and give you social skills. Because that's, yeah.
I'm sorry, you are saying that you expose conflicts in your artistic practices, but you're also talking about preaching to the choir. So why not do it in the artistic world?
I try to. I think I try to. I think there are. I mean, my PhD is about trying to do that within the artistic institutions. And I've done projects where I work with commissioners in the art world, and like my falling walls is kind of those things. And I think I tried to, I don't think I'm very good at it lately. I think I need to do it more.
Okay.
Yeah. If you can give me a commission, that would be a really, really, really interesting thing. Thank you.
Sorry.
Is the holding a mirror up with any kind of like notion of creating sort of empathy? Is that like a goal of it?
Empathy?
Yeah, towards each other, or does that not matter at all? Is it just purely the conversation?
That's a hard one. I mean, I have friends who would probably say I'm quite an empathetic person, but I don't know. But it's not an maybe that's just an integral part of who I am, but it's not a conscious intention. Yeah, that's a hard one because the empathy kind of bit goes a bit towards healing and helping. Yeah, and I'm not comfortable with that. But understanding, yeah. I don't know if that answers.
No, yeah, it's fine. I'm just trying to grasp something. When in conversations, if there's a fundamental conflict, and you were saying
why bother? Why do we bother? Why do we bother? I don't know. You tell me. I bother because it's exciting.
Alright.
I go back to that quote. As social beings, we only learn about ourselves through other people. So I hope to do that because it's exciting. I want to know more about me, which is highly selfish. We're all selfish bastards.
Do you find that sometimes just even by asking a question, you are being didactic? Like, there's some, I think, the framing of things or the question you choose to ask can inherently be like, well, where do I stand on this? But I want to know what you think, but you already know my opinion. Like, how does that work within your work?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's about all art. It's about framing the right kind of question. It's not about, I think it's about kind of asking the question that asks it in a way that's needling, but isn't didactic. I think one can, and I know I have.
And is it okay if you do stand somewhere on a point? Or would you be like, I'm going to try and find the most neutral way of discussing this?
Oh no, quite the opposite.
Where are you like, this is where I'm at?
Well, I often intentionally take the opposite view.
Of what you think?
Yeah, or often intentionally take the opposite of what the other person is saying. Or if there's, because I think that's where it's interesting. That's where we are able to kind of, my dad does that to me and I really hate it. And now you just said that, I realized what I've done. Here and then there, and then we should.
It seems that you benefit a lot from this space to reflect on the work that you've made. Within spaces like this, a long time afterwards, in the institutions as well, you talking about an 8-year time lapse from the point of challenging the council. Where are those spaces for the participants? I've got constantly in the participatory work. Where are those spaces to really understand what the outcome has been for the participants that allow that reflection, that deep understanding, but with the time lapse from the experience of the work?
It's a really tough one. I think a lot of those institutions like Devon Arts and a lot of other longer term embedded places, they do it really well. A lot of places don't, because the vast majority of the times I'm there for 3 months tops. And my PhD is about trying to challenge the institution to be the artist in that sense. They're trying to say to the institution, you stay. Your works are, I just realized I'm out of the camera, sorry. They stay. You are the ones that hold those relationships. I'm temporary. I would love to be permanent, but that's not how it works. And you don't have the money to employ me all that time, and I have to eat. It comes down to that. There's a big bit of research coming out of Queen Margaret's University, not by me, by someone else, about those kind of spaces coming up. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I try to do it as much as possible. There are kids that I got involved with at the Father's Day project who I'm still in touch with, 7 years down the line. We're not pally. Well, one now works at my local bar, which is really weird, because he was like 15 when I met him, and now I'm like, double rum and vodka, please. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's a problematic. I think places like that choose to do longer term duration things are quite rare, but they're better ones. I think Hannah had a question.
I was just going to say that your practice is about taking risks in all aspects. So therefore, what would you classify as like failure, or like where does that threshold meet where you don't feel like you have got what you need out of it, or where the risk has not been like unsurfaced?
No, I know it's a tough one, but I mean, like the walking project is a failure to me. It's a failure of a project that because I'd committed to something and that it just turned into something else, but I kind of had to go through it, and it doesn't. I don't want to say it doesn't happen very often because that's not true. Failure happens all the time. But a lot of the times they happen in the projects. Like I'll try something and nothing, no one shows up. And then I go, okay, I'm totally barking up the wrong tree. I have to try somewhere else. So there are less failures that are, except for the walk, which is quite a bombastic failure in some ways. It's not a failure. I realized this is going out in the world. It was very successful. It was a failure in some other ways. But a lot of times they happen like in the process of those things. They are, I've tried something, nothing happens, I have to try it again. Or I've talked to certain people and that just ends. So it does happen. I think it would be really good for me to fail a lot more. I've been really lucky in the past couple of years when I've had some really good projects that I'm feeling quite good about. And it's probably about time I have a really massive failure. I have to learn a lot more about myself. Anything else? Okay.
I'm going to ask a tricky and a cynical question.
Good.
And it's just because
Am I an asshole? Yes.
I ask this question myself.
Okay.
Too. Once a week, especially Emily's body working with Palestinians. So this is a question that was a lot. We're talking about colonialism. At the end of the day, you have extras for your artworks. You have free workers. You have homeless Pakistani kids working for you without pay. You have all this project in which you use less privileged communities, and at the end of the day, you're the one sitting in the museum or so on. So how do you deal with this ethical question?
Because, well, first of all, they're not materials because we're involved in it together. I'm not using them for my art. We've done it together, and a lot of times they take the documentation home with them. They have it as much as they want to do. And second of all, I never show it. Well, that's not true. I did in the past. I don't do it anymore. I never show it without their permission, and it doesn't go to galleries. I don't really do exhibitions. It's always in the moment. But I think last of all, it goes back to that idea of what Bishop says is that that a community can tell you to fuck off. It's that informed consent. I think if I go into a community group and I sort of say, hi, I'm doing this project and this is what's going to happen, and I don't know where it's going to go, but do you want to come with me on this journey? And we can, in some moments, find things out together. And if they come with me, that's great. And if they don't, that's also okay. But a lot of times it's about what I don't call it art. A lot of times I just go, we're going to do a thing. It's only important to me that it's art. It's only important to me because I'm an artist. But if you're doing something and you're getting just as much out of it, that's great as well. That's absolutely fine. I have just developed a module called Ethics and Participation because it is a huge thing. And I think that when you frame, you can make people materials and that's fine, but they can also be co-authors. And it's about how you phrase it with them. I would never call those Pakistani kids my free workers because it was their project. They took it over. I didn't hire them, they didn't do anything, they knew exactly what was happening, and I let them take it. So it is as their project as mine. Now I'm standing here in Glasgow in front of talking about this, so yes, I get more resources than they do. But I'm honest with that. I kind of say, well, this is what's going to happen. I can't stay in here, fix your lives, because I'm just here for a little time. But do you want to do something for a little bit? And that's really hard to do sometimes, especially when you're walking away from people whose lives are horrific. And I know that I'm going to go home to my house in Edinburgh and sleep in my big bed with my husband. It's like, that's just shit, right? But that's why you do it. That's why you keep doing it, because that's the exciting bit. You got to keep having those conversations. It's a very good question. I wish I could answer it in a way that makes me sound good. Yes.
This kind of goes on from
Yeah.
that last question. I've been talking a bit about the term of participation as opposed to collaboration.
Yeah.
Do you ever consider the people that work within the projects that you work on as collaborators? Because that suggests a bit more interest
Yes.
in just taking part.
Yeah, and I have done. I do that, and it depends on the notion of the projects of what we end up doing with them, because, and I'm very honest about I'm getting paid and certain things are going to happen. And if it comes up to a point in time where I want to be a collaborator, then I have to ensure that that equally happens, and we do it together that way. And if it can't happen, then we can't. I don't want to put someone in that position where they're not going to be treated equally as me, so they can't be a collaborator. So I changed the notion of the project. But I think you're absolutely right, and I think that terminology is really important. So yeah, and I have done. I tried to do more. Yeah. Who's hot? Me. Would you like? Yes, please.
I mean, this has been very interesting because now I know that we disagree on almost everything.
Good. I love this. I love this.
So it's a very good starting point. But I believe that the majority of your arguments can be valid only if you kind of specify that you are talking about work on demand.
Yeah.
Because that is a very specific condition.
Yes.
Because there are artists that are not working in that
Absolutely.
way, that are committed to one community
Absolutely.
only for the rest of their life.
Yes.
So this is really interesting, and also it shows the fact that some of the dynamics that are going on in the art world are not sustainable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and by doing this, probably we are not really delivering any good service to any community. I think it's important to clarify that all we have been talking about is specifically work on demand.
Yeah, I think that is, it's something that I think needs to be more vocal about, because I am that guy, as I've said all the way through, I'm only there for 3 months. I am working on demand. I'm an artist going into communities to do this project. I will leave. So, you're absolutely right. It's the implicit. But I think there's also a realistic thing that has to be addressed in terms of the finances and survival of the artist that talks about those things. But I think you're right. And actually, I really like the fact that we disagree on a lot of things, because to me I think that it proves that it's not a fixed thing. It's not a fixed service entity that you can just go, we plug that, and this is what happens. Actually, we still need to negotiate a lot of those notions. Yeah. Where do we go from next then with this disagreements? Where should we go next?
Well, certainly, I suppose that all this needs more and more conversation.
Yeah.
And it's visible that the majority of disagreement is about definition.
Yeah.
Because even when you use the word art, and when you are trying to position specific practices, you are already having in your mind a very specific idea of what you mean.
Yeah.
And it's visible to me that anytime you are interacting with people, either there has to be an art piece or there has to be you.
Yes.
So the condition of being art is mediated by the fact that either you are making an artifact or that there is an artist is present.
Yes.
But actually there are lots of different possibilities for art to actually take place within participation or communities. And so I suppose we will have to kind of start this conversation and keep training and understanding more what are the definitions. And I totally agree that there is a huge proportion of practitioners that are believers of socially engaged practice that are trying to kind of convince the rest of the world that that is the only way through. I think that is located in the book, located in The Producer, that Paul O'Neill at a certain point used this word, the evangelist. We are working as if we are trying to convince someone else of a belief and to convert these people.
I wonder if I'm an anti-evangelist.
Maybe you are an anti-evangelist. But so I think that you are totally right in that, but at the same time I also think that the critique is kind of partial,
Yeah.
because he's still talking about artists that for some reason haven't got their own intentions,
Yes.
but they are responding to an invitation,
Yes.
or they are trying to fit within the premises that have been offered to them. And there is nothing wrong with that.
No,
with
it's
that.
just it's a very narrow definition.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you everyone. One day I'm going to be too old for this, but
Oh my God. Thanks
Thank
so
you very
much.
much. That was great.
It's really good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.